For decades, we've all thought of Alzheimer's as a disease that starts and ends in the brain. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place this whole time? A brand new study is suggesting something absolutely wild, that the answer might lie somewhere completely different in the body, and it's turning everything we thought we knew on its head.
So get this. What if the real battle against Alzheimer's isn't about neurons, but about our bones, specifically our bone marrow? Yeah, I know it sounds crazy. The idea that a brain disease could actually start in the factory that builds our immune system, it's a total departure from how we've always looked at this. But this radical idea led to an equally bold experiment. Okay, but before we can even get into that crazy experiment, we've got to understand the core problem they were trying to fix. And it's something that happens to all of us. Our immune system gets old right along with the rest of us.
It all comes down to this process called clonal hematopoiesis. Now, that's a mouthful, but think of it like this. Imagine your bone marrow is a big workshop. When you're young, it's packed with a huge, diverse toolkit of stem cells. You've got every tool for every job. But as you get older, a few mutated, kind of overzealous tools start to take over. And eventually you're left with, just a couple of wrenches instead of that full set. It dramatically limits what your body can build and repair.
And you can really see the difference here. A young immune system, with its diverse toolkit, is like a super efficient cleanup crew. It's on top of everything. But the older system, it's just not as effective. It struggles to fight off infections, and this is the really key part for our story. It gets terrible at clearing out all the junk and waste that builds up in our bodies, especially in the brain.
So yeah, this isn't just some abstract idea. This decline has huge consequences. One of the biggest is the buildup of those notorious amyloid-beta plaques in the brain, the hallmark of Alzheimer's. The body's cleanup crew just isn't what it used to be. And that connection, right there, is what gave these researchers their big idea.
Which brings us to the experiment itself. This is where things get really interesting. The researchers asked a pretty wild question. What if you could rejuvenate that old, tired immune system by basically giving it a factory reset with a brand new bone marrow? So here's what they did. The setup was actually super clever. They took older mice that were specifically engineered to get Alzheimer's-like symptoms. They gave one group of bone marrow transplant from young, healthy mice. And then the other group, the control, got a transplant from mice their own age. After that, they just sat back and watched. Would hitting the reset button on the immune system actually do anything to the brain? And the results? Well, honestly, they were jaw-dropping. Way more promising than anyone probably dared to hope for. I mean, it was incredible. The young bone marrow literally seemed to turn back the clock in these older mice. At a genetic level, genes related to aging just flipped back. Their immune cells suddenly got super effective at clearing out that amyloid-beta junk again, and that led directly to fewer plaques, less inflammation in the brain, and maybe the most amazing thing of all, the mice actually got better. Their cognitive behavior improved. So naturally, when you see something like this, the first thing you think is, okay, when do we start human trials, right? This seems like a total game changer. But this is where the story takes a very sharp and very necessary turn. Because let's be real, translating this from mice to humans isn't just a hurdle. It's more like a giant wall with flashing red lights and warning signs all over it, for some very, very good reasons. Dr. Zachary Harvanik from Yale really puts it bluntly here. The procedure itself is the single biggest barrier. He says it's just far too risky to even consider doing on healthy people as some kind of preventative treatment. And we really need to understand why. A bone marrow transplant isn't a simple procedure. It involves using chemotherapy to completely wipe out a person's entire immune system before you introduce the new one. It's a brutal, high-stakes process that we reserve for things like aggressive cancers. It is absolutely not a casual anti-aging therapy. And if the massive medical risk wasn't enough, then you have the ethical minefield. Dr. Hervanik brings up this chilling point. The second you start talking about using parts from young people to rejuvenate older people, you get into some seriously dark dystopian territory. Billionaires as vampires using young bone marrow to stay young forever. It's a future nobody wants to see. So if a direct transplant is off the table, does that mean this whole thing was just a cool science experiment with no future? No, not at all. Actually, this is where the real work starts, trying to figure out how to get all those amazing benefits without the dangerous transplant.
And researchers already have a few pretty promising ideas. One is something called an autologous transplant. Basically, you'd bank your own bone marrow when you're young and healthy, and then use it later in life. But the real holy grail, that would be to isolate the secret sauce, to figure out exactly which proteins or cells in that young marrow are doing all the heavy lifting. If we could do that, we could maybe develop a drug, a targeted therapy that gives us all the good stuff, safely and ethically. And that really leaves us with the big takeaway here. The real value of this incredible study isn't the transplant itself. It's the secrets that it could help us unlock. It's put a giant spotlight on the immune system's role in how our brains age, and that new knowledge could open up a completely new front in the fight against Alzheimer's.